Great. Thank you, John. And thank you and Olivia for inviting me to participate in this exciting conference. As John said, I'd like to acknowledge my co-author at Urban, Karen Smith, who was an essential part of this paper. So what we're trying to do in this paper is to really assess the financial security of future retirees. And there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about what the outlook might look like. So, for example, we know that the increase in Social Security's full retirement age is going to cut benefits for future retirees. We know that private employers are shifting away from DB plans to DC plans, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but which does create some uncertainty. Labor supply has been falling for middle-aged men for the past few decades. We know that earnings has been stagnant for men in the lower half, lower two-thirds of the income distribution. And we know that retirement needs seem to be increasing. Retirees in the future may need more money to cover rising out-of-pocket healthcare costs, both for medical care and for long-term services and supports. They might need more money to cover growing levels of indebtedness. They have to now cover more debt or service more debt in retirement than in the past. And as people live longer, they're going to need more money to get them through this longer retirement period. Other trends, though, are more encouraging. So women have been working for pay more now than in previous generations. They've been earning more. The increase in the average wage raises Social Security benefits for all beneficiaries, regardless of how much they earned. One of the bigger risks that people face in retirement is widowhood. We know that poverty rates are quite high for widows. The good news, though, is that widowhood is declining as the gender gap in life expectancy shrinks. And then people have been working longer. People have been extending their careers, working more into older ages, and that means more lifetime earnings. That means that their retirement savings don't have to last as long if they reduce the retirement period. So those are some encouraging things. And so what we want to do in this paper is to sort of put all these things together and try to assess retirement prospects for future generations with a focus on the early millennials, who we're defining as those born between 1981 and 1985. So the analysis consists of two parts. In the first part, we used household survey data to compare employment, earnings, pension coverage, household wealth at younger ages for multiple generations, and to really ask, are more recent generations on track to a successful retirement? And then in the second part of the analysis, which is really what I'm going to focus on in this presentation, that uses a dynamic microsimulation model to project retirement income for future generations. So in the first part of the analysis, we're looking at outcomes at particular ages. We're comparing outcomes at particular ages across generations. So we created these synthetic birth cohorts from using data from the CPS's annual social and economic supplement and from the Survey of Consumer Finances. So for the CPS analysis, we compared outcomes every 5 years from 1966 to 2021. And we looked at 5-year birth cohorts running from the early 30s to the early 1980s. So our youngest cohort was ages 36 to 40 in 2021. The oldest was 86 to 90 also in 2021. And we looked at the following outcomes: educational attainment, labor force participation, full-time employment, earnings, and marriage rates. And then we used the Survey of Consumer Finances to compare outcomes every 6 years from 1989 to 2019, looking at 6-year birth cohorts running from people born in the late 1920s, and then people to the early millennials, here defined as 1980 to 1985. And the outcomes here are more financial outcomes. So total wealth, retirement account balances, financial wealth, home equity, and debt. And so I really don't have time to get into all the details of this analysis, which was really quite detailed. But let me just give you a quick top line results here. Again, as sort of echoing what I said in the introduction, there are some discouraging trends and some more encouraging ones. So on the negative side, we do see that male labor force participation rates continue to decline before age 55. Men's median wages still stagnant, though we are seeing some positive developments for millennials. Millennial men's earnings do seem to be growing. But people born after 1970 are not accumulating wealth faster than those born in the 1960s. This reverses a long-term trend. Generally, each generation accumulates more wealth that trend seems to have stopped, at least temporarily. Also, the effects of the Great Recession continue to linger, reduce household wealth for nearly a decade. Things are recovering now, but that loss in that wealth could have some long-term effects. Debt levels remain higher than they were 2 decades ago, especially at older ages. Millennials are less likely to own a home. But on the positive side, we do see millennial women working earning more in their 20s and 30s. Labor force participation rising sharply at older ages. Millennial men and women more likely to have a 4-year college degree than previous generations. And importantly, millennials' net worth appears to be on the same trajectory as previous generations. But what I really want to talk about here is the second part of our project, where we're using Dynasty IV, Urban Institute's dynamic microsimulation model, to project future retirement incomes. Basically, what this model is doing is taking all of these results that I just talked about and bringing them together and saying, okay, how is that likely to translate into future retirement incomes? So what Dynasty IV does is it starts with a representative sample of individuals and families from 2004 and 2008 survey of income and program participation, and it ages them year by year. So it's simulating key demographic and economic and health events. Then it takes probabilities that we model from equations from various sources of household data. Those probabilities are used to generate these transitions across these different states. And then all these equations that we use account for differences by sex, education, earnings, and other characteristics. We implement program rules to project benefit payments from various programs. Importantly, we're using generally the same assumptions as the Social Security and Medicare trustees use. The model, we can adjust those, but to be consistent with Social Security and Medicare, we generally follow their assumptions. And then importantly here, we're assuming that scheduled Social Security benefits will be paid. We know that the Social Security program is scheduled to be unable to pay full benefits by 2035. That's going to affect certainly millennials and many other generations of future retirees. But in this model here, we're assuming that those full benefits will be paid somehow. So our output, we're looking at 5 birth cohorts each 5 years. So we're comparing outcomes for the pre-boomers, as we're defining here, 1941 to 1945. Then 10 years later, the early boomers, 10 years after that, the late boomers, Gen X, born 71 to 75, and then our early millennials, born 1981 to 1985. And then we're comparing two measures. One is inflation-adjusted income levels at age 70, and then replacement rates at age 70. We're focusing on age 70 because by age 70, most people have retired. For married people, our income level is per capita, so we're simply dividing by 2 if you're married. And then the replacement rate is defined as age 70 income divided by average annual earnings received from ages 50 to 54. So basically here we're saying, how does your retirement income compare to the earnings you received when most people are working, ages 50 to 54? Is that, are you receiving enough income in retirement so you can maintain your pre-retirement income levels? And we're using that basically, we're using a 75% replacement rate as that threshold. Again, it's kind of crude, but just gives an indication as basically how well are you doing relative in retirement relative to how well you were doing when you were working. And then we're looking at 2 measures of family income. One is a traditional cash measure that the census uses. So it's simply cash income plus money that people withdraw from their retirement accounts, particularly to satisfy the minimum required distributions. And then we're looking at a broader measure, total potential income. And what this does is it starts with the cash income, but then it adds the income stream that you would receive if you annuitized 80% of your financial assets. So this is to adjust for the fact that over time, people are receiving more retirement income through income as a lump sum instead of DB retirement pension income streams. So what do we find? So some results are very encouraging. Here we're showing the median per capita annual household income at age 70. This is the traditional cash income. And if we look at the right, 1981 to 1985, those are early millennials. Their median income, we projected age 70, will be $44,700 in inflation adjusted 2021 dollars. That is more than any previous generation that we looked at. It is about 22% more than the pre-boomers, those born between 1941 and 45. So a pretty encouraging story there. And then we look at a broader measure, total potential income. The same story here. Potential income here is about 6% higher than cash income. Again, the millennials doing well. But if we look at how many fall below that 75% replacement rate, here the story is not quite so encouraging. If we look at the blue bars, the traditional measure, you see that the share falling below that 75% rises from 31% for the pre-boomers to 52% for the millennials. If we look at total potential income rising from 26%, those failing to make the replacement rate to 39% for the millennials. So again, the question here. So here we're saying that millennials projected to get more income, but maybe not being as likely to replace their pre-retirement earnings as earlier generations. I think put all this together, we're not seeing a looming crisis in retirement preparedness concerns, and then we have a lot of uncertainty. So how will the stock market play out? Interest rates, housing prices, inflation. How about health? How is that going to affect the ability to extend careers? How rapidly will future wages grow? How will policymakers address Social Security's long-term financing gap? What about the need to pay for healthcare and long-term services and supports? And importantly, here we're just looking at you're looking at overall median, but how do things vary across subgroups of the population?